How can you really tell who is good and who is evil in the world when we're all just trying to survive? That's the big question that I think a lot of Breath of Fire 3 hinges upon. Stick around while I talk about that.
Bloop boop boo. Bloop doop doo. Bloop doop da boo.
Hey, I'm Michael. Thanks for watching my mostly spoiler-free review of Breath of Fire 3, a game I appreciate but don't really love. Breath of Fire 3 is a JRPG developed by Capcom and initially released in 1997 for the PlayStation. As a game on the PlayStation, it took advantage of a lot of the things that a 5th generation console could more easily do, like 3D graphics and CD quality audio, including some voice acting. The game is in a mostly fixed isometric perspective, and the battles are turn-based. Alright, so now let's get into my thoughts on the story of the game. If you saw my most recent game review of Suikoden 2, you'll know that I now allow fractions of points in my large category scores, which can allow for some more specificity in my overall scoring. The score for story, as you saw, is a 4.5 out of 5, so that's pretty good. But I think it's pretty good while also having some major flaws. I want to talk about some spoilers, but I'll save those for the very end of the video, so you'll have lots of warning. But to continue with the non-spoilery talk, this world is so vibrant and colorful. I really like that you see some real-world things at play. Taxes, border checkpoints, passports, haves and have-nots. Most everything in this world is explained and has systems that were built up around it by the people who live in the world. There are some pretty common tropes in this game, but I don't mind because most of the writing is actually very good. The mixed tone of this writing works very well. Some really dark things happen in the story, but most of the world is filled with such wacky characters that it never feels too dark for too long. But also, since those wacky characters still mostly feel real themselves, it doesn't feel like silliness for the sake of silliness. I didn't clean my glasses before this. I should do that. But I'm not going to re-record anything. This game also involves a pretty large time skip. It's fun to see all the ways that the world has changed during that time skip. Sure, the map hasn't changed, but for a good example, look at the vegetables that are produced at one of the locations in the game. Early on, these vegetables are pretty new and they're just starting to take off as an option for shoppers. After the time skip, these are actually the only option for shoppers, and various NPCs will tell you how they feel about that. I think where Breath of Fire 3 is strongest is in its morality. Throughout the game, the player is asked to question the morality of what's going on. I'll get into this more in the spoiler section at the end. Story-wise, one spot where this game is weak is in its pacing. This too will be covered at the end, but here I can say that there is far too much backtracking in the game, especially if you get deeply into the Master System. I love the callbacks to Breath of Fire's 1 and 2 in this game, and there are a few that I can mention without going into spoiler territory. The opening title screen essentially shows the end of Breath of Fire 1 in the mural, and very early in the game you see a large fossilized dragon that looks very reminiscent of the large dragon in Breath of Fire 2. When you finally make your way to Windia, someone explains that all of the Windians used to have wings and were able to fly, but have slowly lost their wings throughout time. It seems very clear that this world is the world of Breath of Fire 1 and 2, just significantly later. That alone gives this world so much more lore because it has all of the lore from the previous worlds as well. Breath of Fire 3 has relatively few characters across the board, at least compared to many other RPGs. Because of that, just about every character feels important, and you get to know these characters pretty well. However, that leaves the door open for the possibility of there not being a character that the player can really latch onto and sympathize with. Fortunately, this cast of heroes is pretty great. Ryu is a silent protagonist, but it kind of makes sense that he's silent in this case. He certainly hasn't lived a normal life, but he still shows enough character that you can get a sense for how he feels about more things than the typical silent protagonist. Rei is so great. I love that he starts the game as a bumbling, accidental guardian of two young kids. He's just trying to do what's right most of the time, but he's also doing what he needs to do to survive and so that the kids he's watching can survive. In fact, he fits into this world really well because of that. It seems like everyone is fighting to survive, but Ray fights to survive while still being goofy. I love that his characterization is so strong throughout that he even has a catchphrase. Doesn't that just beat all? Nina's also kind of great. She's dealing with the tropes that a lot of sheltered princess characters have to deal with, especially longing for more freedom and trying to balance that with her duty to her family and her kingdom. Before the time skip, she's sheltered and curious to know more, but also so used to people taking care of her that she doesn't know what to do in many situations, especially when her "you can't do that, I'm the princess" type response won't work. After the time skip, she's at least outwardly much more confident, but she still feels the internal struggle between the person she's expected to be and the person she wants to be. Momo is my favorite. She's so funny. She's almost chaotic neutral, but she's ultimately on the side of good. I love that we have a character who's mostly interested in her machines and learning as much about them as she can, but when she has the opportunity to help someone, she does. Gar is a really interestingly flawed character. He feels conflicted about so much in his life, which I'll get to later, and he goes back and forth between saying what's on his mind and bottling all of his feelings up. And finally, Pico. I don't hate Pico, but I almost never really like the cute little mascot party member, but I do have more to say about him in the spoilers section. I think the worst thing about this cast of heroes is that most of them have really weak motivations for going along with Ryu on his journey, especially post-time skip. They even talk about their motivations at several points in the story, almost as if the game is trying to convince you that they have compelling motivations, when I don't think they actually do. Normally I'd talk about villains next, but I'm moving that entire section to the spoilers at the end. But I can still talk about NPCs. I'll do so in pretty big, broad strokes. Honey is the way to do a mascot character correctly. For one, she's not a playable character. Perhaps more importantly, she doesn't talk or make any cute or annoying sounds. I like that you can kind of forget that she's there, but then she does something surprising. Even though I griped about the master system before, I really do like most of the masters, especially Bunyan, who takes on an accidental fatherly role and has a great scene where he talks to a cow, Amitai for his brilliant performance, and Dace for being a cool recurring character who gets some extra development in this game. Also, I love almost all the characters that have anything to do with boats, and I'll just leave that at that, and I love the fairies. Speaking of fairies, if you love me, wait, that's terrible. I'm sorry. If you're enjoying this video, please give this video a like. It does help a lot. If you have any thoughts about anything I'm saying, especially the complicated stuff in the spoiler section at the end of the video, let me know in the comments below. Subscribe if you want to see more video game reviews, music reviews, covers of video game songs and other songs, and whatever else is tangentially related to the themes we're discussing. If you don't watch every video, that's fine, but I'd appreciate your subscription. Anyway, moving on to graphics. As usual, I have the least to say about graphics because I just don't know enough about them and how they work, and I don't really have the language to talk about them. However, I will say that this game has some of the nicest little animations of any game in this era, and it's just like the other Breath of Fire games that I've reviewed, compared with the games around them. There's so much life and character in even the simple things like walk cycles and idle animations. Attack animations have some real weight to them, and the enemies' animations give some real character to things as simple as like a little goblin or whatever. Like the graphics, most of the design in Breath of Fire 3 is really strong. This world is full of an interesting mix of things that stick pretty strongly to tropes and designs that are very much their own thing. For instance, Ryu looks like a very typical RPG protagonist, as my artist friend Michael pointed out in our recent video on character designs in Breath of Fire 3. Similarly, characters like the King of Windia have designs that are very much expected. But then we have other characters like Momo, Gar, Balio and Sunder, Miria, and Honey that are much less expected. I love how the world map is designed in a way that it hides the fact that it's actually pretty linear. It's also pretty small. It's a small world after all. I'm sorry. That small world means that there's not much transportation in the game, and what is there is a little disappointing. But anyway, I like that there are different regions to this world, and most of them have towns in them that feel very different. But the vast majority of the regions outside of the towns pretty much look and feel the same as most of the other regions do. But it still works overall, and it looks nice. Within that world, though, the towns, the designs for them, they're all great. There are relatively few towns for a game of this type, and that helps to make them all feel unique, just the same way that having relatively few characters makes each of them feel unique. There's the little farming village, the town built up around the arena, the town that is built at the foot of the castle, the shipping town, the fishing town, and so on. The very last town you reach in the game is a fun surprise that I won't spoil here. The dungeons are mostly pretty good and distinct. I think only the volcano overstays its welcome. Most are quite short, except for the aforementioned volcano and for the final dungeon, but it makes sense that the final dungeon is long. Also, the final dungeon has distinct parts to it that keep it fresh as you're going along. While you're in those dungeons, you see the excellent design of the monsters in the game. They all have so much life in them that I don't even care that there are a few monsters that are just palette swaps of other monsters. Alright, now for the music of this game. It's at turns jazzy, at turns beachy. It usually has a sense of humor to it. Quite often it has a really fun bass line. But overall it's just okay. I think it's interesting to look at a few other reviews and see how they talked about the music. Wikipedia quotes two different reviews from GamePro. One says the music veers widely from unmemorable electronica to hopeless schmaltz, and more often than not, it doesn't add to the atmosphere of the story. The other GamePro review describes the music as a compilation of elevator and mall music. Yikes. While I think those reviews are exaggerating more than a little bit when they talk about the music, there is a kernel of truth in there. The music, like so much of the game, honestly, is interesting at first, but gets tiresome by about a third of the way through. This game's score sounds a lot like other game scores. It has some similarities to Chrono Trigger, just listen to the forest themes from both games back to back, and it has similarities to Final Fantasy, but it's not as good as either Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy games. It has some similarities to Arc the Lad, but I think it's better than Arc the Lad, and it's about on par with the music from Lunar, and it also shares some similarities with that soundtrack. This game, though, has some of the best sound effects out there. I love the little things that are voiced here and there. Momo yelling "Protecto" is so much fun, and other things like that are great. In general, there are some really goofy sound effects that I love, and some really pretty sound effects, like the sound you hear whenever you use any healing item. Alright, the real sore spot of this game for me, the gameplay. I want to start by talking about the final boss of the game. But this isn't a spoiler, because the real final boss is the isometric camera and controls. It should not be this hard to quickly hit that switch. It should not be this hard to kick a rock into a pond. It should not be this hard to stop and talk to an NPC. It just feels awful. Now onto the battles. There are some pluses and minuses to the battles. There is kind of an annoying number of random battles, but that's sort of par for the course at this time, and it's not the worst. But I also really do like that there are no random battles that are required on the world map. You can choose to go into a battle arena on the world map, or you can ignore it. I like that not too much grinding is necessary, and I'm surprisingly less tired of the battle system by the end of this game than I am at the end of many RPGs. And of course, the dragon transformation system is great. It's really fun to mix and match and try and figure out what your favorites are and spam those at every boss battle. Another sore spot, the mini games. You're forced to play most of them, if not all. I can't think of one right now off the top of my head that is optional. Fishing isn't the worst, but it's slow and it's just ultimately not that appealing to me. But even things like drawing water from a well, why is this a minigame? Why is it so annoying? And then we have the Desert of Death. I honestly don't think it's that bad, and it can be kind of meditative but it takes forever, especially if you mess up a couple times like I did. The ones that are really dreadful, though, are the ones that are combined with the annoying map movement, like kicking rocks into greenhouses. The next annoyance, though it's a minor one, is the camera. It would be better if you could just rotate the map 360 degrees, which would then also probably fix the difficulty of the isometric movement. Also, it doesn't make sense that things are hidden from the player by the geometry of the map when they would be so plainly visible to the characters in the game. For instance, early in the game, you can find someone's wallet and return it to him. You have to turn the camera to be able to see the wallet blocked by a wall, but it would just be lying in the ground in plain view in front of you. It's not that this is new to this game. For instance, I always think of that when I think about the secret passageways that are all over Final Fantasies 4, 5, and 6. It's just always silly. But to end the gameplay section on a lighter note, the learning curve and the difficulty are pretty much just right to me. Now, I like easy games, so this might be too easy for you, but you can figure that out for yourself. I did grind a bit here and there, and I did have one game over to some cockroaches in the mansion toward the very beginning of the game. I feel like I just barely skated by in a lot of the boss battles, but I think always having made it through without having to stop to grind is part of what made me feel this game to be more balanced and rewarding. This probably added to my feeling of not being tired of the battles by the end of the game. I talked about some reviews of the game earlier in the music section of this review, but on the whole, Game Rankings aggregated the score by reviewers of this game as a 74%. I think it deserves a bit higher than that, and my calculations gave it an 83%. Here's where this game's score fits in the context of other scores around it. You'll note that Breath of Fire 2 is above this one. I like Breath of Fire 2 more, partially due to my nostalgia, as that was my first Breath of Fire. But part of that too is due to how much I'm charmed by the jank of that game, and by how endearing some of those characters are. Both games are delightfully wacky, but only one has frustrating isometric controls. Bottom line, do I think you should play this game? I think it's ultimately still a good time, mostly, but if you only have enough time to play 1 or 2 games this year, I might suggest you keep this one on your backlog until you get through all the real gems. And here's where this video will end for some of you. If you don't want any spoilers for the game, leave this video now. Thanks for coming by. Let me know if you do end up playing the game, what you think of it. For those of you who have already completed the game or who, like me, don't mind spoilers, let's move on to the last section of this video. Alright friends, let's talk about spoilers. I have some things to say that would have fit into my story and characters categories that, in many cases, are what elevates this game from the 74% that Game Rankings shows most critics thought to the 83% that I think it deserves. As I mentioned in the story chapter, this game really effectively comments on morality. From the very first boss fight with the Nue to the very end of the game, you're constantly asked to think about if what you're doing, or what you have done, is right. The Nue was just trying to feed her cubs, and she didn't even realize that they were already dead. The money we steal from McNeil and give to the townspeople is actually given back to him right away, and people wonder why we did that. The mutant at the dump realizes it is a mutant and knows it must be destroyed, and actually agrees to be destroyed, but it still doesn't feel good. Several of the fights in the game are against people who are on your side, but you still have to fight them to the death, like Geist and the Elder Dragon. And then we get to Ray, who has committed multiple murders in the time skip, and never receives any punishment for that. We even have the moral question of siding with the Brood against Miria. Your conversation with the Elder Dragon throws a lot of moral grayness onto your decision. I think Miria herself was mostly doing what she thought was right for most of the inhabitants of her dying world. These moral questions aren't really dwelt on. The game doesn't righteously tell you what is good and what is bad. It lets you feel that dissonance within yourself, and it's probably the most brilliant thing this game does. Very few games achieve something like this that effectively. I mentioned in the story chapter that the pacing was weak in this game, and it is in Breath of Fire 1 and 2 as well, with all of the backtracking you have to do in all three games, and all the various things that need to be collected to achieve one part of a sub-goal that will lead you to a bigger goal. If you think about it, Ryu has three major goals or objectives throughout this game. First, to survive. He has to survive as a baby dragon, he has to survive with Ray and Tipo, and he has to survive through the end of the game. Once separated from them, Ryu has a second goal of finding Ray and Tipo. But soon after Ryu meets Gar, he receives his third goal, to meet God. That's it. It's not even completely clear that Miria is the big bad, we just know that we have to meet her. But ultimately, that third goal ties back into the first in a way, the will to live. And that in itself ties back to the difficult morality in this game. It seems like most of the characters, as I've already said, are just doing what they need to do to survive, or to help someone else survive. The Nue, the mutant at the dump, the Brood, and even Miria herself. Gives you a lot to ponder. Moving on to spoilers about characters, I want to talk about Gar. I think it's fascinating that he, like Ray, has killed a lot of people. He even tries to kill Ryu when he's a child. But he's been feeling conflicted about that mission that Miria gave him for a long time. When he finds adult Ryu, it's Gar's determination that sets the rest of the game in motion. He needs to find out why his god asked him to commit so many murders. When Miria herself dies at the end, he knows that he has completed his mission and turns to stone like so many of the other Guardians before him. I said that I wanted to come back to the villains. While each of the villains individually is good, there are so few of them and there's no one big bad that you're clearly fighting against for the whole game. Malio and Sunder are an effective threat, but once they're dead, there's no constant thorn in your side or ultimate being that you're afraid of. This is an interesting storytelling quirk, but I feel like the lack of a clear antagonist makes the progression of the story meander a bit. The reveal that Tipo is actually a dragon and that he is your enemy is great. This works especially well on replaying the game when you see that adult Tipo comes to young Ryu in a dream at the beginning of the game. I think it's interesting how artist Michael guessed that Tipo was a villain just based on his color scheme. Then with other villains, you get McNeil and Mikba, who are interesting, brief villains in what they represent. When you finally do meet Miria, she's an excellent, complicated villain, and I just wish we got to see more of her. The last character I want to talk about is another one of the heroes, Pico. The reveal that he is the embodiment of Yggdrasil is interesting. I like that Miria is afraid of him. I like that he sprouts in the desert at the end of the game, suggesting that there's hope for the world. But I'm baffled that he has had this power the whole time. Why is he so very much not powerful throughout the game? He can undo the deaths of the party members that Miria causes at the wave of her hand, but is pretty much useless in battle unless you spend a lot of time growing him to be the most powerful character by effectively using the Master System. That's bonkers to me. Anyway, this ended up being a longer video than I intended it to be. If you stuck around for the whole thing, please give this video a like. Subscribe if you want to see more reviews and ramblings about video games and music, along with a few other things here and there. Up here is a video that YouTube thinks you might like, so check that out. Down here is a playlist of other videos that are video game reviews, so you might want to check that out too. That should be about it. Maintain your groovy selves.